Joining us now, Pat Buchanan, of course, esteemed writer, someone who actually worked in several administrations advising on a range of topics and understands how to communicate them better than pretty much anyone I know. He joins us now. Pat, it's great to talk to you. We're going to get into the Mr. Thin-Skinned Obama in a moment with you, but let's talk about what the president faces still from the establishment in his own party as his trade policy has really borne fruit here. We see that even Bloomberg is admitting that the so-called trade war has really not hurt the United States at all, and it's the burden has been really heaped on the shoulders of the Chinese.
Well, that's the truth. The hundreds of thousands of manufacturing jobs have been created under President Trump, and the country's moving back in the direction of reindustrialization. And the Chinese, since they export to us about $500 billion a year, and they purchase a little over $100 billion, they're far more vulnerable to a kind of tariff struggle with the United States than are we. So I think but there's one thing, in the economy, there's talk that the aspects of a trade war, or the possibility of a, quote, trade war with China is bad news for the global economy, and that's been threatening the market. But you're dead right. Our good friend Larry Kudlow is as big a free trader as they come.
Yeah, I mean, he's better than he used to be, and I love Larry. He's a great person. But he's better than he used to be, because I think now when you get into it, like really get into the details of what China's doing and don't just look at a spreadsheet in Goldman Sachs, it's bad. And you see this, Pat, like there are a lot of little mini Buchananites on the issue of trade now popping up all over media. You really see people seeing what China has gotten away with all these years.
I run into them constantly in green rooms. But you're exactly right. Look, the Chinese have an economic nationalist policy and have had one for 30 years. And the whole idea is to hold the value of their currency down in order to export massively to the world, to, in effect, transfer industries and production from countries like the United States into China and use these massive surpluses of wealth. They've had something like $4 trillion in surpluses with the United States in the last 25 years. And this is the money they use to expand their Belt and Road project. They are thinking long-term. They're thinking like Americans did in the 19th century, that eventually we're going to be the greatest power in the world. We're going to replace Great Britain and the British Empire. That's the way Americans thought, and it's the way the Chinese think and believe. And the question is, for Americans, have we become so dependent upon consumer goods produced by China and Asia and in other countries that we simply are unwilling to pay the temporary price to restore economic independence of our own country? And that's the question that Trump faces. But he is the only one that has stood up and faced it in the last 25 years since George H.W. Bush.
I mean, it's really a miracle. Pat, every time I get frustrated by something in politics, I think to myself, who would have thought that, like, let's say in the middle, let's go back to 2011 or go back to 2005 under Bush. Who would have thought that this guy, Donald Trump, would single-handedly turn around our trade policy by putting in a couple of great people like Lighthizer at Trade and a few others, Navarro at the White House is doing a good job, and really change minds? I mean, there's this piece today in the Washington Post. China's specialists who long supported engagement are now warning of Beijing's efforts to influence American society. It was a big report that came out, the Hoover Institution and the Asia Society Center for U.S.-China Relations. It's titled Chinese Influence in American Interests, Promoting Constructive Vigilance. And it pulls together a range of examples of Chinese operations, from legitimate activities such as lobbying to more covert, coercive, or corrupting behavior, such as pressuring Chinese students studying in the United States to spy on their Chinese peers on American campuses, and also, of course, to try to siphon off research information while they're studying at Stanford or MIT or RPI or any of these other colleges and universities that have extensive research operations in key areas.
You know, what's happened here is the utter, total, complete naivete of the Republican Party in the 1990s and the first 10 years of the 21st century about the nature and character of the people they were escorting into the WTO, giving these massive surpluses, giving them most favored nation trade status, saying that, look, let's buy goods from them and when we'll escort them into the world stage. And now they wake up to discover that maybe the tiger is predatory. And now all the evidence comes in of thievery, of American technology, of currency manipulation, of actions utterly inconsistent with a country that wants to be a friendly trade partner, and thoroughly consistent with a country that wants to become first on earth militarily, strategically, and every other way. And now even these guys are waking up. You wonder how many of these folks that are now hardliners on China were voting for MFN for China and normal trade relations and bringing them into the WTO and all the rest of it. It's the same, with the foreign policy. We're tied down in all these places all over the world.
Mess.
And they thought it was a great idea in the 90s and first decade of the 21st century to get into them.
Well, listen, speaking of what you just said about the reliance on Chinese money and Chinese investment, Chinese consumers, Tiffany's, like the jewelry Tiffany's fortunes remain married to Chinese consumers. Tiffany's was hurt by reduced demand from Chinese consumers, both in China and those shopping in the U.S. China accounts for about a third of all luxury brand spending. As Chinese spending increased, there was a boon for luxury brands. But the overdependence poses a risk, too. And it shows you that, Louis Vuitton and Prada and all these other, it's just a money game for them. There's no thought. They're not governments. There's no thought about, well, okay, how is this ultimately going to affect the countries from which we started and which we originated? That's not how they operate.
Their allegiance is to the bottom line on the balance sheet. It's to money for the salaries for the fellas in charge and make sure the stock price stays high and it stays well on the market. And who cares if the factory's being shifted to China rather than the United States, because the allegiance is to the corporation, it's not to the country. So, but again, people are waking up, but the key question is, have we gone too far down this road to where I give Donald Trump credit. He's making a tremendous effort, and there's no doubt people are telling him if you keep playing hardball with the Chinese, it could really foul up the economy for 2020, or the market could go down, and that could really damage us. So I think he's doing the best he can, but historically, people are going to hold a lot of these globalists to account.
Yeah, I think we see the fruits of the Wall Street Journal mindset, which was really open borders, open markets.
I looked the other day. I was looking up something we might have forgotten because I was fighting against it 10 or 12 years ago. The North American Union. The whole idea. We're going to merge Mexico, the United States, and Canada. And there was a quote in the story by Bob Bartley, who was the editorial editor of the Wall Street Journal, that, Vicente Fox has an ally for the North American Union idea right here in the Wall Street Journal. I mean, no newspaper in America pushed harder for this globalist free trade, open up to China, open borders. Indeed, the Wall Street Journal used to campaign for a constitutional amendment of 5 words, there shall be open borders. I mean, that's a Wall Street Journal of Bob Bartley, intellectual leader or one of the intellectual leaders of the conservative movement. And now a lot of the folks who were cheering that on are down there calling, build that wall.
Well, again, the tyranny of the expert class. We've seen this time and again. Well, what do you make of this row over the Turkish consulate for Saudi Arabia, and this Khashoggi disappears, gets all cut up clearly by someone operating for Saudi Arabia? What's your thought on that?
Well, my take is that it's that I can't believe that 15 guys in a hit squad, including members of the Saudi Crown Prince's security detail, went in and murdered this guy and carved him up, unless the Saudi Arabian the Crown Prince, had ordered it himself. I do agree with Trump on this. Look, Saudi Arabia is an important and vital piece to U.S. foreign policy in the Persian Gulf and in the Middle East. And they're led by an individual now who is palpably guilty of cold-blooded, premeditated murder of a journalist. And he's not an American citizen, but he's a Saudi journalist, and he was killed in a consulate. So I think that the attitude of the Senate, frankly, I've been against the intervention in Yemen. And I think the attitude of the Senate is understandable, but this is going to present a real problem, Laura. And I tell you why. The Saudis, the Israelis, and the neocons and the hardliners are really pushing toward a closer and closer confrontation with Iran. They want them dealt with sanctions, and if not that, deal with them the other way. And Saudi Arabia is a vital piece to that puzzle. And that's what I think Pompeo was saying up on the Hill yesterday. Listen, fellas, you can't drive the Saudis away from us because they're part of our anti-Iran strategy, and that's what you guys are all for. So it's going to be interesting. The Saudi prince is down in Buenos Aires now.
Yep.
It's going to be a great meeting.
Yeah,
they got Xi Jinping and Putin and Trump.
That sounds like a joke. Putin, Xi, and
the Crown Prince.
Putin, Xi, and the Crown Prince walk into a bar. Trump doesn't drink, so he goes in and says, hey, Pat, I have to play this for you. So at the Baker Institute in Houston, you had Jim Baker, of course, former, when you look up GOP establishment. Yeah. So they're talking about civility in politics. Let's listen.
The biggest challenge we're going to have over the next 10, 15, 20 years is to return to a civic conversation in which if I say this is a chair, we agree this is a chair. We can disagree on whether it's a nice chair, whether we should replace the chair, whether you want to move it over there, but we can't say it's an elephant.
Well, and for some reason we're not playing Baker, but Baker basically agreed. Your really quick reaction.
Well, I think Baker's a member of the national establishment, and he's a key member of it on the Republican side, and Barack Obama has Trump on his mind and Trump's style on his mind. And they're two individuals who really are behaving like the members and leaders of the American establishment, which has been somewhat shouldered aside.
Yeah, so, because Barack Obama and Michelle were known to be so giving and warm to their conservative critics. And they're always inviting Republicans in for confabs at the White House. I mean, come on. The establishment tried to kick you out of the whole party, Pat, the GOP establishment. And meanwhile, Obama shut down all dissent within his own party and from the Republicans during Obamacare, the stimulus, and even during the Benghazi scandal. So this idea that civility is they have the monopoly on civility is laughable. It's just absolutely laughable.
All we care about is our Bibles, bigotries, and guns.
Well, I'll take the Bible and guns, that's for sure. That's not a bad way to go. Hey, Pat Buchanan, thank you so much for joining us. Hope to talk to you before Christmas.